Folk, gentlemen, ladies, all of you, welcome to this afternoon's gathering in the name of Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni. My name is Kopano Matele, and mine is just to facilitate so that the afternoon goes well. Very briefly, I'm going to start by introducing Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni, and I will step away from the video as soon as Sabelo begins. Sabelo will speak for about 30 minutes, but I will get to that shortly. So today, this afternoon, would have been great if it was face-to-face for all of you, I'm sure, so that we can hear Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni's words and his ongoing thinking about what he'll be talking about today. Today is about celebrating him and saying farewell. It's sad that you're leaving, but these things happen. This is organized by the Institute of Social and Health Sciences at UNISA, in particular, Professor Mohammed Sidat. You might be seeing him and his team. Let me go ahead so that I don't have to step back in and introduce Professor Sabelo. All of you know Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni, but I need to say this. He is currently, and before he leaves us, a research professor and director of scholarship at the Department of Leadership and Transformation in the principal's office at UNISA. He has worked also as an executive director in the Change Management Unit. He was the founding director of AMRI. He also founded the African Decolonial Research Network. You'll know about it. Then at UNISA, a rated scholar by the NRF, a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa, a fellow of the African Studies Center in Leiden, I think, in the Netherlands. So he, as you know, is a man of many achievements. But when you start to talk about what I think you know him best for, Sabelo is incredible. He is a prolific, one of the most prolific writers I know. I tells you about his own reading. And I'm not going to read all of the publications that you know. We have one on your screen, but he has written about the Ndebele Nation, a book that came out in 2009, the Ndebele Nation Reflections on Hegemony, Memory, and Historiography. He has written Do Zimbabweans Exist? He's written about Redemptive or Grotesque Nationalism, a book that came out in 2011. Latterly, I want to mention the books that has really cemented his voice as the leading, or at least one of the leading decolonial thinkers in the world, and certainly in Africa. This includes his latest one, Decolonization, Development, and Knowledge in Africa, Turning Over a New Leaf, coming out in May 2020, next month. What you see is Epistemic Freedom in Africa, that came out in 2018. He also had the book, The Decolonial Mandela, which I recommend to everybody. And before that, Decolonizing the University. Sabelo, you're such a prolific scholar, a reader. Again, certainly we're going to miss you. Some of us just listening to you, hearing you, and your interventions. Okay, Sabelo, this is your time right now. You take the time you need, put up your presentation. And as you said, these are thoughts, ongoing thoughts. This is not finalized. If people want to talk to you about the presentation, they can make contact. Over to you, Sabelo.
So thank you.
You want to close it?
Sure, thank you so much. I hope everyone is hearing me.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, the topic which I want to reflect on is the planetary human entanglements and the crisis of living together. And I'm trying to offer some provisional reflections on COVID-19. As you said, Kopano, at the beginning, we planned to do this before COVID-19, and our plan was to have something which was going to be social, where as colleagues, as comrades, as friends, we will have met to break bread and catch up on many things. And I remember the person who actually contacted me with this idea was Professor Mohammed Sedat. And by then, the new language which we were speaking about today, that of lockdown and the social distancing, was not yet in our vocabulary. And the idea was that I was going to come physically and then meet colleagues. And I was already aware that I was going to be asked to say something. But the interesting part, it never crossed my mind that I will be talking about coronavirus or COVID-19. It was not a subject in my mind. What I wanted to talk about were issues of borders, migrations, identities, belonging, citizenship, which are linked to the issue of my shifting jobs from South Africa to Germany. But the outbreak of coronavirus swiftly interfered with our thinking on these issues. For instance, I was going to be talking about deborderization of the world, the necessity of opening up borders, and the possibilities of a borderless world. But as you can tell now, we're talking about lockdowns, which is actually the opposite of what I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to talk about planetary human entanglements and the cosmopolitanism. But now I think we need to be speaking more about social distancing and the end of the forms of greetings which were used to. The topic of coronavirus, just like the virus itself, seems to be forceful, and it actually invades our minds to the extent that if I was going to be talking about another topic which is not that one, I don't think it was going to attract as much interest, because you will feel like you are out of topic if you are not talking about this topical issue and this reality which we are facing. But I must actually say that these are provisional reflections, and as provisional reflections, I must also reveal that my background is from historical studies. And because of coming from that background, we always very reluctant to speak about the murky present and the mysterious future. We tend to leave the present to political scientists with their scenarios, scenario planning and others. And we also tend to leave it to philosophers with their utopic visions about the mysterious future. We generally leave the mysterious future to prophets and sangomas, but and we don't have shortage of those. So when I'm speaking here, you will hear the voice of somebody who comes from the historical studies. And I thought one of the first things which we need to perhaps reflect on, it's a fundamental question which is haunting me at the moment. Can we use the same theories which we use during normal times to understand a time like this one, whereby the whole world is experiencing a crisis? And that is the first issue which I want to bring forward for our discussions. That are we sure that the theories which we've been using all along are up to speed with enlightening us in terms of COVID-19 and the possible future beyond that? And I don't have an answer, but I have some reflections on that. And one of the reflections which I want to share with all those who are listening is this idea that, are we sure that the knowledge which carried us up to the time of this crisis can be the same knowledge which takes us into the future, or the knowledge which can take us out of the crisis? And I'm thinking along here with the people like Emmanuel Wallerstein, who spoke about rethinking thinking, but at the same time said, but rethinking issues is a normal way of how academics do their work. When new evidence emerges, we rethink thinking. And he then said, but it is important for us then to sometimes escalate rethinking into unthinking some of the things, particularly some of the theories which are no longer helpful. And I'm thinking here also along the lines of Nguku wa Thiong'o in Globaletics, where he introduced this concept of the riches of a poor theory. And his idea was that we need to think about new theorizing which is grounded on the real lives of the people, particularly the lives of the poor, who are actually the majority. And he provided us with a very interesting definition of the poor, when he said the poor means being extremely creative and experimental in order to survive. And I think the moment we are in now is that moment whereby it has made all of us really poor, to the extent that we will need to think creatively and experimentally in order to survive. And this links also with the insights I've been collecting almost all the appearing publications on COVID-19, particularly by African scholars, most of them who are saying, but when we're thinking about COVID-19, this is the most important time not to look to the West or to, to the global North for solution. And they are actually arguing that a Professor Eliseo Makamo, for instance, was advising Africans not to copy European responses to COVID-19, arguing that this event might be an extraordinary event which disrupts the lives in the global North. But are we sure that in this part of the world where crisis has always been with us, it is really extraordinary, or is an addition to other crises which we've been facing? And he went on to say, perhaps we might be facing the same enemy, but are we sure we're facing the same risk? And his ideas are also linked with those of the Liberian scholar Robtel Pile, who actually argued that perhaps this is the moment for people to learn from Africa and the global South. And the justification for that is that the global South and Africa in particular, Africans have been actually facing a number of crises and the risks in recent history, including the epidemics. And the issue is, we need therefore to think deeply about the moment where we are in and try to name it properly if we are to think about it rationally. And one of the things which I think COVID-19 has done theoretically and even existentially is that it has made almost all the people of the world to appear like the people of the South. And my thinking about that is that if we depart from that point, it becomes an important moment whereby we need to think about knowledges from the global South. And the knowledges from the global South is very relevant knowledges to think about epidemics and the crisis, because the global South has been actually experiencing crisis after crisis, maybe perhaps for over 500 years. And if that proposition is taken, therefore, it's a moment whereby we need to seek solutions to the problems which we are facing, perhaps from endogenous knowledge, from indigenous knowledge systems, from the Southern theory, from epistemologies of the South. And this thinking comes not just as an intellectual curiosity, but because we have empirical evidence that countries like Liberia, for instance, they experienced 14 years of civil war. And after that, they also experienced the challenge of Ebola from 2014 to 2016. And the knowledges which they gained from those experiences, I don't think they can be taken for granted at this moment. So we will need perhaps to go to that type of knowledge and experience and the existential condition to say, what is it that we can learn how did they survive this epidemic, Ebola, and what knowledges did they produce, which might be useful for us as we're facing another epidemic in the name of COVID-19. And this Robtail also goes on to show that during the Ebola problem in Liberia, people improvised in terms of protective equipment so that we don't then find ourselves in a situation whereby we have to wait for equipment either from China or from Europe. We'll need really to use our own knowledges and our own experiences to grapple with this epidemic. And the letter by the African intellectuals, which were written to the African leaders, dated 17 April 2020, the African intellectuals are also almost underscoring the same call of saying, yet as a continent that is similar, that is familiar with pandemic outbreaks, Africa has a head start in the management of large-scale health crises. And this is why I'm thinking perhaps it would be important for us to shift from normal times theorizing to a time of theorizing during the crisis and drawing from another archive, not the one which is Eurocentric, which we have always been drawing from. And building from this perspective, I then also thought about how do we think about this COVID-19? And I thought about three concepts: the concept of paradox, the concept of crisis, and the concept of crossroads, which I termed the PCC. And I found the concept of the paradox to be a very important one. No Marxists, they use that concept of paradox in terms of a dialectic, that concept, that mode of analysis, which enables us to capture contradictory manifestations of phenomena or issues which seems not to be understandable, and trying to make them understandable. But I then tried to say, what are the paradoxes which we are seeing in the context of COVID-19? And one of the paradoxes which I identified is the paradox of the increasing planetary human entanglements, countered by reterritorialization and upsurge of nationalism, exclusionary feelings, and the rising walls of world states across the globe. And we, in other words, I'm trying to argue that we already saw preferences for enclosures, barricading, and the distancing within what is known as the global village. And by those who considered their own locales as the zones of being, and who had illusions of being in the zones of being, trying to close out those who are coming from the other zones. The second paradox, which I think we need to take into account, we all agree that this is a pandemic which we are facing, but the way you are responding to it, you are responding territorially and in terms of national solutions. And I think there is a paradox there, the poverty of the border method in containing the virus, which does not respect the borders itself. Then the third paradox is a well-known one, the paradox of a modernity which creates more modern problems without modern solutions. And this COVID-19 becomes one of those recent problems which we have no solutions. And I'm not sure, as we proceed, we need to think carefully about our knee-jerk reactions in terms of lockdowns and social distancing. How sustainable are they in the long run in the context of their impact on social orders, livelihoods, and economics? And the other paradox, which I think is very important for us to think as we think about COVID-19, is the paradox of living in a world which invests successfully billions of dollars in creating sophisticated weaponry for mass destruction without equal investment on issues of health, the issues of human security, indeed the issues of human life itself, because of our preoccupation with the will to power and the paradigm of war. And the last paradox which I want to speak to is the paradox of opulence versus poverty. And I think that is coming out clearly across the world, that this issue of racial capitalism is operative logic of creating and maintaining an even development across regions will actually impact on how we actually deal with this issue of COVID-19. Perhaps it was with reference to this paradox that the Iranian Deputy Minister of Health, Iraj Harish, remarked that the virus is democratic, and it doesn't distinguish between the poor and the rich, between the statesman and the ordinary citizen. That's why I was saying this pandemic in some way makes everyone look like a southerner, a person from the southern. The second concept, which I think is very familiar, is the concept of the crisis. And I want also to say, I think the world has been in crisis for some time. And what is interesting is how, in the face of this crisis, even people who claim to be atheist and secular, you find that they write books which actually speak the theological language in terms of end of times, apocalypse, and Armageddon. But I think the most important question is to try to name the crisis. What is the crisis which we are facing today, which manifests itself in terms of COVID-19? And I think the leftists, I see they've produced a lot of work immediately after the outbreak of COVID-19, and they are actually identifying capitalism itself as in crisis, as actually generating crisis, and also generating ecological crisis. But I think if we're talking about capitalism, the terminal crisis of capitalism, we're talking about a tributary to a sea, and we need to actually name the sea where this crisis is located. And I'm thinking it is important for us to then see it perhaps as a civilizational crisis, because it has this ecological, it has got the economic, it has got social, it has got the epistemic in it. And I think the best person who predicted that one day we'll be facing this is none other than Emir Cizé in Discourse of Colonialism, where he spoke about a civilization that proves incapable of solving the problems it creates is a decadent civilization. A civilization that chooses to close its eyes to its most crucial problems is a sick civilization. A civilization that plays fast and loose with its principles is a dying civilization. And he says this as far back as 1955, but it looks like it is coming straight to for our generation to actually experience the crisis itself. And I wanted also to add that it might actually be a crisis, also a crisis of knowledge, which makes our health systems not actually be ready to deal with this COVID-19. And I want also to argue that in my thinking, a crisis in knowledge will always manifest itself in institutions and the systems, and the health system is not an exception. But what is also important, even if you read thinkers such as Thomas Kuhn, they always tell us that the moments of crisis, the moments of necessity, are actually the great moments of unthinking things, and actually the moments of invention. And the African intellectuals, they seem to have picked that argument again to say the continent must take its destiny back into its own hands, for it is in these trying moments that new and innovative orientations must be explored and the lasting solutions adopted. And I think it actually speaks to how the crisis, how can we take advantage of this crisis to unthink so many things, to actually think differently about the human relations, about the relationship of the human and the environment, the relationship of the human and the other selves here on Earth. And then the last point which I wanted to talk about as the entry point is the crossroads. And I'm thinking that where we are at the moment, I have no other term than the word crossroads. A point at which difficult decisions have to be taken so as to come out of a difficult situation. And I think this coronavirus has plunged the whole world into a crossroads, a moment of rethinking and even unthinking. That's why it becomes very important for us then to to find ourselves in the Shakespearean language, whereby there is this issue of saying going back is as difficult as going forward, and how do we envision the post-COVID world? And the African intellectuals who wrote this letter, which is widely being circulated, they seem to have actually came to that conclusion as well. In the call, we urge African leaders to think beyond the current crisis as a symptom of deep structural problems Africa has to confront if it is to become one day sovereign and an actor that contributes to the new global order. And they proceed to say the global order is disintegrating before our very eyes, giving way to a vicious geopolitical tussle. And their proposal is that to move beyond this crossroads will need a new political idea of Africa. And they argue that this new political idea of Africa, it must be based on ideas adaptable to the realities across the continent. Having spoken about these three entry points, I then come straight to the issues of lockdowns. And again, I'm using that concept of paradoxes to try to make sense of the lockdowns, whereby there are questions of life, there is a question of security, there's a question of freedom, and there is question of economy. And the African intellectuals in their letter, they said, adopting the all securitarian model of containment of northern countries, often without much care to specific contents, many African countries have imposed a brutal lockdown upon their populations. Here and there, violations of curfew measures have been met with police violence. If such containment measures have met the agreements of middle classes shielded from the crowded living conditions, with some having the possibility to work from home, they have proven punitive and disruptive for those whose survival depends on informal activities. And that's an important argument which we need to, an important reality which we need to grapple with as we hide behind this issue of lockdowns. And the issue of lockdowns, again, revealing the contradiction within the current liberal democratic order, whereby there is always tension between life, security, freedom, and the economy. And I want to argue also that if I'm thinking as a historian, I think we were actually coming to this type of lockdown, the issue of securitization and the lockdowns. From the time of 9/11, the inauguration of the war on terror and the securitization discourse, we actually plunge ourselves in a society, what Achille Mbembe will call a society of security, which is not necessarily a society of freedom. And Achille Mbembe elaborates to say a society of security is a society dominated by the irrepressible need for adherence to collective myth taken for certainties. It is a society that is fundamentally fearful of truth, fearful of the unknown, and ultimately fearful of itself. It is this deep-seated fear of itself that is then projected outside to whoever stands as its opposite. So I think we're now actually at that time is no longer an issue of theory. But the question which I think I must actually preempt before we even go to discussion is, how do we move beyond this crisis? And I think my work is actually on decolonization and decoloniality, and this work on decolonization and decoloniality is to think about a body of thought which has planetary implications, liberatory implications, which actually deals with actual questions of life chances, the question of life futures, and the question of rehumanizing, particularly for those who have been degraded and those who will actually pay the price during this time of COVID-19. And I go back to the work of Frantz Fanon, who says we need to perhaps decide not to imitate what Europe is saying. And I think the previous scholars whom I have named, they also say that perhaps we need not to just imitate, we need to think from where we are and perhaps learn from the experiences of how we have survived other epidemics, how we have survived other risks, how we have survived other crises. And this takes me, as I slow down towards the end, to what is it that the decolonial turn can offer and they actually envision beyond COVID-19. And I identified about 10 Ds of the decolonial turn to say, but from a decolonial turn perspective, we have been calling for de-imperialization of the world for a long, long time. And this de-imperialization at the moment, I think we can speak about it in terms of a realization that a problem which haunts people in Wuhan in China, you don't stand up and say it is a Chinese problem or is a Chinese virus, because it will hit Italy, it will hit Germany, and it will hit South Africa. So we need to understand that we live on the same earth, we share the same space. And then the second one, which I think is important, is desecularization, whereby we, because of this COVID-19, we're actually worshiping two gods as where we hang our hopes. We hang our hopes on spirituality and we hang our hopes on science. You will see the convergence of the two, that even secular thinkers, they then say, but let's look up to the heavens for the solution, or let's wait for the vaccine to come. So this issue of separating science and the spirituality, it looks like in times of crisis, they actually converge in interesting ways. Then the other issue, which is very important, which again, people who are working within the decolonial studies have been speaking about, is the issue of depatriarchization. And this becomes very topical now, whereby the care industry, the nursing industry, that's where there is a conglomeration of most of the women, and they are actually facing the front line in fighting the COVID-19. And I don't think we can actually run away from this issue that the world needs really to depatriarchize. The world beyond COVID needs to be a depatriarchized world. And then the other one is the well-known one, deracialization. This issue of the zone of non-being and the zone of being, the issue of a color line dividing people. I think a coronavirus has actually humbled almost everyone, to the extent that we must then rethink ourselves as human beings here on earth, that this earth is a space for all of us and we need to share it with respect. Then the deep bourgeoisement, again, I think is coming in terms of this continuation of the lines of who is poor and who is rich, who will die first and who will die last, who will have access to health and who won't have access to health. And I think that is very important. And then the issue of decorporatization, this issue of commodification of everything, becomes really very topical now, because from as far back as the time of slavery, you will see this issue of the market logics redefining the world, and at the moment creating economies which are predicated on accrual of profit after profit. But the moment of the COVID-19, it tells us that we will need to rethink the economy itself, and they think about not economy of profits, but economies, moral economies of care. And I think that is coming out very clearly. A democratization of the pyramidal global power structure underwritten by coloniality. I think that one also comes out very clearly. People are talking about on a daily basis. But what I think is also important at this moment is what I spoke about this issue of saying, should we use the knowledge of yesterday to solve the problems of today? Should we use theorizing, which is based on normal times, which is attuned to normal times, to deal with a crisis moment? And that's where I'm speaking about decolonization, the decolonization of Eurocentric knowledge, so as to open up to ecologies of knowledges. And I think becomes very important when people are beginning to say, but when we are dealing with a challenge like COVID-19, you will need perhaps to draw from your experience, draw from your own survival techniques, which actually are emerging from your existential conditions. And then, of course, deborderization, the abyssal, the issue of paradigm of difference, the abyssal thinking and the exclusionary politics. I think that one also will need to think very carefully in the post-COVID. And then, of course, the whole issue of a post-COVID world, where we pick the pieces whereby we were working with the logics of genocide, logics of epistemicide. I think the post-COVID period, it will be a period of picking pieces and the rehumanization. And my last is to then say, I think we in the decolonial archive, there is a lot of talk about decolonial love. And I think this is the moment where it becomes even more relevant when we are speaking about people being given food parcels, the state actually beginning to come back. Of course, on the one side, it comes back with securitization, and but on the other side, there is a lot of demand on the state to really care for the people. And then we move away from the unreasonableness of colonial, racial, capitalist, patriarchal, sexist reason, which has plunged us into the current crisis, whereby we've even provoked the anger of nature and creating ecological crises. And I've already spoken about unthinking thinking itself, so as to then recalibrate the human relations with other selves, with other beings. And I think COVID-19 also has made it clear that this lie of believing that there can be a world without others, it doesn't work. And it takes us to also, as we think about the post-COVID world, to think about the ethics of liberation, the recognition of all humanity, and perhaps to even think that all human beings are born into valid and legitimate knowledge systems. We need not to look to one geography for solutions to the human problems. And as we do that, we also think about the ethics of living together, founded on decolonial love. We can all die, and it becomes clear that this virus does not care whether we have money or no money. We die in a similar way. And this must remind us about life of conviviality, the moral economies of care and the relations of care for one another, and the hospitality as opposed to society of enmity. I thank you.
Thank you, Sabelo, so much. Yes, please, can we give a round of applause? Yes. Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, I think we're heading to the closing. So here are some closing remarks. As always, last February, I think it was the last time we were in each other's company.
Sure.
We want to find a better word for. I want to find a better word for recognition. And as always, when you give us the fruit of your thinking, we want to sit down with a little bit and reflect what you have said. One of the things that you have not elaborated on, which one wants to think, and you have said this several times. If we're unthinking, you are going really back to Descartes. If thinking is about personhood, is about subjectivity, about being, in thinking and unthinking, thinking itself, you're really challenging some fundamentals about at least Western philosophy and about personhood and at the self. And I like that. And I want you to, and I wonder whether you have pursued this to its outpost, to its limits, about how we think about being human in today's world. And I love that. I like this idea you have been on about that. And another part is this thinking in times of, you said, theorizing in times of crisis, or if you will, abnormal times. And indeed, this abnormal times have been going on for a long time. And I want to join it. I think I read somewhere in one of your pieces, we were thinking, well, I guess here you mentioned as an epistemic struggles. That knowledge itself has to be struggled for. It's a struggle. It's an ongoing struggle, and you are at the forefront, really, particularly in thinking about coloniality here in Africa and globally. And once again, appreciate your thought and being able to interact with your thought. One last thing, and I might be out of here. I want you to respond to this. I think you are such a thorough Pan-Africanist in one moment, but you also somebody who thinks about, global condition, about the planet. And the talk today was about that. So you're thinking both, I guess, using Caesar's things. And one moment you're thinking about the particularity of being in Africa. The next moment you're thinking about the global context. And I'm sure you have reconciled this in your head to think from Africa, thinking to the world, but at the same time, thinking from a certain point in the world, thinking about Africa or think about the world. And those are some of the fruits that you have given me, and there's a lot of notes that I've taken from this. And so in both saying, it's a word you said you don't quite like it, and it looks like a Hollywood word, being recognized, being discovered. We didn't discover you, but not in that sense. In the sense of we recognize the work, it is such a mark in the world. And one of the things is this, I guess, last sentence. One of the things is this, is I have both at my university, but also in this country, on this continent, this love we have to share, this decolonial love. We really admire your work, we recognize it, and farewell from us.
Sure. Thank you. I don't think I actually exhausted. I'm not sure whether my sister Erolwane is still there. This question of recognition is one which actually continues to haunt, because sometimes it comes as a badge of honor, sometimes it comes as a badge of inadequacy. Inadequacy, somebody who is always looking for recognition, it means the person is feeling inadequate. But when it comes to the other questions which we are speaking about, the question of trying to deal with the question of being human, I think it's an inexhaustible question. One of the key issues which I have not explained is that when I started to deal with the question of coloniality, decolonization, I produced some work. But every time when I'm about to send it for publication, I'm thinking, no, it is not enough. I need to think about it again. And I found myself that the books, if it was according to me, they were going to be like book 1, book 2, book 3, because I see myself also growing in thinking about these issues. And every time you want to explicate them and explain them better. So it's a growing scholarship, which you cannot actually then say, I wrote this book and I exhausted this question of the human. I think that question will haunt us across time. And then the issue of the universal and the Pan-African and the African, I think that one is also inescapable. You can't escape it, because the issue is Africa is in the world, and the world, as we think about it, Africa in the world, and also the African world. And I'm thinking in both ways, because I don't want to carve Africa out of the world. I want to think about welding from Africa. What does it mean to weld from Africa? Yeah, so I was saying, when I'm thinking about Africa in the world, I'm thinking about welding from Africa. How do we weld from Africa? The whole of the constructed world, the invented world, is mainly invented from Europe. And it is now time that we think about welding from Africa, from the global south. And will we create a different world system? Will we create a different world order if we think that way? And what are the values? What are the epistemologies? And what are the pedagogies from this side of the world? And one of the justifications for why it is necessary to weld from this part of the world is that we are welding from the part of the world which is the majority world. The problem is that, as my sister Erwan was speaking about, these 5 men from 5 countries, or 5 men thinking from 5 countries, they are a minority of the world, but they make us consume the knowledge of the minority. But we're trying here to then anchor the knowledge of the majority, and they say, can't it then make us see the world better? And if you go to Nguki wa Thiong'o, he also speaks about this thing of the base. Where do you think from? And they say, but the base is the people, and the base is the language from which the people think speak. And if you think from there, you will see the world better. But the problem with the coloniality and the colonialism is that it dislocates in terms of consciousness. It leaves the body where it is, but it dislocates the mind, make you think from where you are not located. And once you are like that, then you are lost. That would be my parting shot.
And what a parting shot it is. Once again, thank you, Sabelo. Thanks everybody who's still around. This was an amazing. Thank you, Sabelo. Goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.